At my mother's funeral, an interesting thing happened. Besides my mother dying. Every year at the anniversary of my father and mother's wedding, they would exchange one red rose. And at the funeral, her casket was covered with a blanket of red roses. And in the front row, in the family mourning pew of the temple, was my father, my eldest brother, who is a Long Island, New York, stockbroker attorney, and his wife, my middle brother, who was at the time under the distinct impression that he was Jesus Christ. And myself, and I don't know who I thought I was. It was a motley crew, to say the least. My father is a very conservative attorney, not what you would call a mystic. As the casket was being wheeled down from the altar after the prayers, taken out to the hearse, as it passed our pew, one red rose fell off the blanket at my father's feet. Now, only the people in the front row saw that. We all knew that they exchanged one red rose, and our eyes were all glued on that rose. The casket was wheeled out, and it was time to go to the cars. My father stooped down, picked up the rose, and took it, holding it, into the car. And we sat in the black limousine, with people coming up to the window expressing their sorrow. Nobody said a word in the limousine. We were all looking at the rose. Finally, my brother Jesus said, "Well, it looks like Mother sent you a last message." Now, he's speaking to quite a mixed bag in that car. But at that moment, everybody in the car agreed. That's pretty far, huh? Nobody even laughed. I mean, most of the things that my brother says, you know, like, are treated with a certain kind of ginger levity. Well, it shook everybody in the car considerably, and my father's next thought was how he would preserve the rose. So my uncle found a process whereby they put the rose in a glass that's full of water, of some liquid, and the rose is eternally preserved. So we had it encased, enshrined, and we put it on the mantelpiece in front of Mother's picture. Now, as time passed, it turned out that the process wasn't quite as foolproof as they had thought it would be, and slowly the water started to turn black, and the rose started to wilt, until we were faced with what to do with this thing, right? At which point my father, after a proper time and in a very genuine way, married a very, very wonderful woman. And so it turned out that this Rose ended up in a closet in the barn, along with other memorabilia that are too precious to get rid of, but too horrible to manifest. That's the closest I've come to a good example of spiritual materialism. Or known as clinging to the high. Last September, Neem Karoli Baba, who has certainly been my connection and continues to be, dropped his body. For those of you that would like another euphemism, he died. Now it's interesting how you react to your guru dropping dead. And I would say that all of us that were connected to Maharaji did a different take of it. There are a number of stories connected with him which give one food for thought concerning this matter of his dying. One story that I've told before concerns him walking with an old devotee, and Maharaji suddenly looked up in the sky and he closed his eyes and he said, "Oh, so-and-so Ma, this very loving woman devotee in another city," he said, "she just died." And then he laughed and laughed and laughed. And the old devotee said, "Why, you butcher, what are you laughing for if she died?" And Maharaji said, "Would you rather that I act like I'm one of the puppets? Would you like me to make believe that this is a sad moment?" Then there's an interesting story when he was sitting with a group of devotees at a darshan, and a man, and he said to them, "Somebody's just arrived. Who is it?" He said, "Nobody's come." He said, "Somebody's just come." And a man rushed in, and he said to the man, "You've come because so-and-so is dying." And the man said, "How did you know?" "Nobody, even the family, doesn't know." Maharaji said, "What do you mean, how do I know?" "I know." Maharaji says, "Well, I'm not going to go to him. He's going to die. I'm not going to go." They said, "Oh, please, Maharaji, come." Maharaji says, "No." He said, "Here, give him this banana. Tell him to eat this banana and he'll be all right." And so they rushed back with the banana, fed the man the banana, and the man dropped dead. It's an interesting one, isn't it? The man was suffering a great deal. Maharaji said, "Have him eat the banana, he'll be all right." Maharaji had kept a diary. And in this diary for some years, every day, he would write the date and the place that he was in, wherever he was moving to. And then he would keep the significant events of the day, which involved 2 pages of Ram, 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 Ram. And every day he would be locked into a room and left alone to do this work. And he would do the 2 pages of the significant events of the day. And so there were these pages, in fact these books, of Ram, 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 dated each day, 2 pages per day for some years, without a day missed. And the books were always moved. Wherever he went, they were taken. On Sunday, he did the Ram, 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 Ram. Then he dated the book for Monday, and he did the Ram, 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 Ram in advance. And then he dated it for Tuesday, and he turned to the woman who was the Siddhima, who is an extraordinarily pure being of just incredible love and light. And he said to her, "Here, I'm all done. You take care of it now. You write Ram." She said, "Oh, no, Babaji." "Yes, you take care of it." He goes, "I'm all done." And Monday night, in a different city, he had a heart attack and died. Now, in Tibet, there's a thing about high beings roughly knowing the moment they're going to die, because they see the past, present, future. They know the whole drama. And I've humorously told about something which actually happened, of one Tibetan Lama who sent out postcards saying, "Next Thursday at 2, I will be leaving my body if you care to come by." Right? And then people gathered, and he turned around 3 times, went into Samadhi, and left his body. Maharaji experienced a heart problem on the train, and he got off the train and he sat on the ground by the side of the road, and just sitting in the dirt by the side of the road. And then he said, "Take me to Vrindavan," which is a very holy city, the city where Krishna danced with the gopis, where a Hanuman temple was. And he was taken to a hospital, and they put tubes in his arms, his nose, just like everybody else. I mean, totally humdrum. And then he came out of the faint, and he pulled the tubes out, and he said, "Jagadish Hari, Jagadish Hari," and he died. Which means, Lord who makes the universe revolve. When I received the cable that Maharaji had left his body, the cable came with some misspellings, as is quite common in cables from India. And it said, "Babaji left his bojay in Vrindavan," and my father received the cable. And he said, "There is this cable," but he says, "I don't understand a word of it. It's one of those Indian things." He says, "Babaji." He had written it out just phonetically. "Babaji left his bojay Vrindavan." He says, "What does it mean?" I said, "Well, it must mean that Maharaji died." And my father and his wife and my stepmother immediately went into, "Oh, that's terrible. Oh, you know. And I stood there, and I was very curious to see what my reaction would be. I mean, imagine if you're a heroin addict and find out your connection's just been busted. I mean, you got about 6 hours. But the interesting thing was nothing happened. That's pretty interesting. And I had some people who were waiting to see me, a married couple with some marital difficulty. And I said to my folks, excuse me, I've got to go out and see these people. I went out and I sat down and they were telling me their side of the fight and all that sort of thing. And every now and then my mind would float away to far out. Maharaji died. And I'd experience him saying to me, just attend to your business. Cut out all that melodramatic crap. Just do your thing. Right? I was looking to get into a little self-pity place, you know. Oh, God, Maharaj. And as the news spread among many of the devotees on the East Coast, we all gathered up at the forum, and it was not until we did an arti, that is an offering of light to the Guru, together, that I finally started to cry. But the interesting thing was, as I was crying, there's this other little being in me all the time who's saying, crying? You crying? And the thing was that the closest I could notice was that the crying was the crying of bliss. It was not the crying of pain. That I was blissing out. Which is exactly what happened to me whenever I get near Maharaji. And within a week, 22 of us flew to India for the fire ceremonies and so on. He had already been cremated, but we went for the ceremony. And all the time I was in India, I kept crying quietly. Crying and crying and crying. But all of the crying was total bliss. It was like a 2-week darshan of his. I was with him for 2 weeks. Because I was with the other devotees, and just as it says in the Bible, Christ, where two are gathered in my name, there I am. The purity of the way in which we were all together in that spirit made that manifest, and I could feel that presence. One of the reasons I went to India, I thought, why do I have to go to India? After all, I don't have to go there to honor Maharaji, since everything I do all day long is honoring Maharaji. I'm dedicating, my whole life is dedicated to him, not by choice. I don't have any choice. Maybe I'm going to India, not for my own personal feelings. I don't have any feelings like this. And I felt there was a propriety in going. And then I also felt that the devotees in India, who were very used to having him with them all the time, they were going to feel the loss most strongly. I had already been banished 18 months before. And I had realized that there was no way you could get away from him anyway. He had said to me in India in 71, he said, I'll always be in communion with you. And he said, and the one I've used that's really I've counted on, he says, I'd never let you do anything wrong in America. Which has led me to be totally outrageous, by the way. Figuring it's his problem, not mine. When I reflect back on it, it awes me that it was Maharaji sitting on a table with a blanket in a little village in India. Who touched me in some way or other, such that everything that happened after that, through me, took on a certain quality that it had not had prior to that. And that quality was reflected, for example, in the book Be Here Now, which I considered his book, not my book. And the result was, if you look at the letters that come in, that literally hundreds of thousands of people experienced a certain kind of connection through that book, which was him sitting on his table in a little village in India with his blanket. No big hustle, no big showbiz routine. Just sitting there. And I began to be in awe of the power of the Spirit. It's interesting to me, especially in view of the American scene at the moment, and my own behavior as well. That all the time I was with Maharaji, as I've said before, there was no time I ever found either a place where he was or a place where he wasn't. That is, he defied every definition I had of what a human being was about. Okay, I've said this many times. There was nowhere I could hide from his mind because he knew what I was thinking, even if I went in the bathroom and locked the door. There was no dirty thought I could have that he didn't sit and like, here we are. But yet, every time I thought I'd labeled him, he wasn't that either. I've told before, just that little routine that's so delightful, of having a friend come to visit me and taking to Maharaji thinking Maharaji will really snow the guy, because it's somebody from the West who's very snowable. Right? And I take the person to Maharaji. Maharaji says to him, come from America? And man says, yeah. You're from New York? No, Maharaji, I'm from California. You have a very good spiritual sister. No, Maharaji, I'm an only child. By which time I'm cringing, saying, come on, Maharaji, do your stuff. Come on, come on, don't. But he had a way of totally foiling my desire to program him. He just wouldn't be who I wanted him to be. When I decided he was stupid, he was bright. When I decided he was bright, he was stupid. When I decided he was loving, he was fierce. When I decided he was fierce and cold, he was the most loving being I could imagine. Because there was no clinging in him. There was no form place where he clinged. He didn't have a model in his head. There wasn't anybody in there thinking, I'm Maharaji. And I'll do this for Ramdas, and he'll certainly be impressed. That's the way I do it, not the way he does it. There was one point in my relation with Maharaji where I was sitting across the courtyard from him. And I thought, gee, what am I doing sitting here? This is just another guy. I mean, he isn't what it is. That's just a man in a blanket. And everybody else was up, rubbing his feet, hanging out and clinging and trying to get more. And I had been doing that for some years. And now I was sitting opposite. I didn't even want to walk over them. And I thought, gee, the connection between us, every time I'd come near him, he'd throw me out. He'd say, go to Rameshwar, or go to Puri, or go to Benares, or go to Delhi. I'd come in for 5 minutes. Everybody else could hang out with him. And I'd come and he'd throw me out, which was hell on my image of myself as the leading devotee. I was sitting opposite him thinking, gee, I'm really not attached to that form. I love him so much, but yet I don't feel the need to cling to that, because that isn't what it is. Whatever it is much more profound than that. That's a doorway to it, but I've been worshiping the doorpost. I've been rubbing the doorpost and bringing flowers to the doorpost, and all the time it wasn't the doorpost. That was just the doorpost, and if I looked through. But every time I'd sit in front of him and I'd think, this time I'm not going to get sucked in. See, I'm not going to get sucked in by his little thing about here's an apple, how much does cinnamon cost in America. The profound secrets he passes on all that. So I decided I'd focus on my ajna and go to another plane, and I'd meet him somewhere else. So I went in, and suddenly I started to shake, and all the Shakti poured through me, and I was going into bliss state. And Maharaji was sitting there, and Maharaji started to snore. And I heard the snoring out of the corner of my ear, and I thought, you don't imagine at this profound moment he's going to sleep, And then he sat up out of his snoring, and he turned to the translator, and he said, ask Ramdas how much Stephen makes in America. And I thought, oh, no, I don't have to come back, do I? And he brought me down. He really ruined my high. And I came down, I said, $30,000. And then I tried to go back out again. And every time I tried, he'd stop me, saying, come on, no cheap highs around here. This time I'm sitting opposite the courtyard, and I'm looking at him and thinking, gee, this isn't the being, it's inside him and inside me. And at that moment, this old man rushes across the courtyard and touches my feet. And I said to him, thank you, I honor him for honoring me. I said, why did you do that? He said, Maharaji sent me over to do that. He said, Ramdas and I understand each other perfectly. That's at the moment when I'm thinking, he's nothing special. And it seems to me interesting that in the Illustrated Weekly in India, which put out the Illustrated Weekly's like Life magazine, and it put out an issue on holy beings in India, present and past, and it had big spreads on all the ones we've ever heard of. And then there were all these small ones through the villages, and in the whole magazine, Maharaji wasn't even mentioned. Now, as a Western PR man, my first thought is, I guess my guru wasn't as big as I thought he was. And the next thought is, oh, far out. Can you imagine doing it without collecting all that stuff? Without building that thing? Can you separate the external trip from the essence? Maharaji was I can't label him because it's not labelable, but he was connected with the tradition of Hanuman. And Hanuman is a monkey. Hanuman is the monkey who serves Ram. And Hanuman is known as the breath of Ram. He is the purest servant imaginable. At one point, Ram says to Hanuman, who are you? And Hanuman says, when I don't know who I am, I serve you. I recognize you, I realize that you and I are one, and when I know who I am, there's only one of us. It's like that Hanuman was the fingers of the hand of God. Hanuman was, in a way, what would be called a pure statement of Dharma. Now, a lot of us are working with the concept of Dharma these days. And there is Dharma with a little d and Dharma with a big D. Because from where we start, once we understand that there is a game that is a little more profound than our personal gratification, than optimizing pleasure in this lifetime for ourselves, we start to reflect on what our part is in this bigger game. And because we in the West think so much, we tend to think our way through this thing. And we often, by thinking our way through, find ourselves in these very bizarre predicaments, where we've thought our way into what we think would be a dharmic act, that is, an act consistent with God's will in the not my but thy will, but it's a head trip on our part and it feels lousy. Krishna Das has traveled with me a lot when I have been on the road. And there is this story that I keep telling, because it always is so perfect, but we both heard it so many times. And I laugh every time too, and he says he laughs every time. So you've all heard it, but you can laugh every time too, because I'll tell it anyway. Because it's about Zumbak the tailor. I can't not tell it, I'm sorry. It's just... Maharaji's telling me to tell a joke. That's my cop-out. See, I always say, he said it, Don't come on to me. I don't have anything to do with it. It's not my trip. If there is one of you that hasn't heard it, for you I am telling it. Zumbak, this man went to tailor Zumbak to get a very expensive suit. Because Zumbak was one of the best suit makers around. I won't tell this with a Yiddish accent because it's... And so he comes in for the final fitting and he puts on the suit and it turns out that this sleeve is 2 inches shorter than this sleeve. So he says, Zumbak, was ist das? This sleeve is 2 inches longer than the other one. Zumbak says, there's nothing wrong with the suit, it's the way you're standing. He says, if you stand like this, it fits perfectly. And then the fellow looks in the mirror and he notices a big bunch in the collar and he says, Zumbak, what about that? Zumbak says, look, your head should be down like this. And slowly he gets the man into a very contorted position until the suit fits perfectly. And the man leaves wearing his new suit and he gets on the subway and somebody comes up to him and says, what a beautiful suit. And the fellow now can hardly speak, and he says, I bet Zumbak the tailor made that suit. And the man said, how did you know? And the fellow said, well, only a tailor of the quality of Zumbak could fit a man as crippled as you are. And the reason that I have to keep telling that joke is because so many of us have gotten caught in Zumbak's suit as we've head-tripped our way into the holy journey, right? And you meet people, I'm a happy person. I love everyone. I don't eat meat. Exquisite. It's not what's said, it's the quality of the way it's said. It's always said with that slight moralistic overlay of, I think I ought to, so I am, but I don't know, it doesn't feel quite right, but it must be good, because everybody says it is. And for example, Maharaji said to me, Ramdas, don't touch money. So I said to him, well, Maharaji, how about just for gas for the car and for food? He says, okay. So a few weeks later, he said to me, Ramdas, paisa nay, money no. I said, Maharaji, what about money for gas? Because with Maharaji, it gets repeated many times. I said, Maharaji, what about money for gas and for food? He says, nay. Okay. So I was in India, so what I did was I took all my money and I gave it to one of my guru brothers, who then followed me around. When I got on the bus, he paid the bus driver, see? Which is a certain kind of a cop-out, you might say, right? When I came back to America, I found it quite difficult to not touch money, and I ended up touching money, which I do. But the interesting effect of his words are that every time I touch money, I hear him saying, don't touch money. And I work with that in such a way that I'm hearing that what is the touching of it is the touching with your mind. It's a certain kind of an attachment to money. And I'm just struggling with that on. And people say, well, isn't he your guru? And I say, yeah. Well, didn't he tell you not to touch money? Yeah. Well, are you touching money? Yeah. Well, don't you do what your guru says? Yeah. And I just look innocently. Now, to me, that all feels all right. Because my connection with Maharaji is in a place where one of the things... give you an example of what I'm about to say. There was a sadhu, a very lovely sadhu, who many of the Westerners loved very much. And once in Allahabad, I had always felt about this sadhu that though he was very lovely, there was something about him that was sort of hustling a little bit, just a little bit. And he was trying something with me that didn't feel quite right. And I just was sort of pulling back all the time. I thought he had a lot of light and was very beautiful, but that's true of many beings. And that was... So I pulled up to the house Maharaji was staying at, and there was a little fence. We were in a rickshaw, there were 3 of us. And there was this sadhu, this man, sitting under a tree, outside the gate. He wasn't in the house of Maharaji. The other people in the rickshaw jumped off and went over and sort of touched his feet. I paid the rickshaw and I walked over. And the man stood up and we pranamed to one another. And then we stood there looking at each other. Now here was the predicament. Here was a gate and a fence. I was about to walk in the gate. He was standing outside the gate. I didn't know why. And I felt that since he had stood up when I came along, it was in some way my responsibility to take him inside. But there was something in me that didn't feel right about doing that. And I couldn't do it. And I just stood there pranaming and smiling and pranaming and smiling, but I couldn't say, would you come in? Because there is a thing, I don't know how to say it, but there was something about purity that determined who I could bring to my guru. I don't know how to say it, or whether it's judgeable, or whether it's wrong, or what it is. It's just that's the way it happens. It's just like some evenings I can never talk about Maharaji because the audience won't let it happen, because there's a judgmental quality in the audience that makes me just, it won't come out. And at this point, an Indian man rushed out from inside, and he made a big thing about this sadhu being there, and he took him inside, and I thought, uh-oh, I blew it. Here's an important sadhu. I should have taken him in. And I sort of cowered my way in, and I sort of sat in the outer room, and I noticed that this sadhu now was sitting in the outer room. He wasn't in with Maharaji. And shortly after, he was gone. A little later, Maharaji called me in, and he was sitting surrounded by Indian devotees, and he said, look at Ram Das. He said, he's very learned. He can probably speak well, but he doesn't know anything about people. And everybody's agreeing, yes, Maharaji, he doesn't know anything about people. And I'm thinking, I must have really blown it with this guy. This is probably the guy outside was Krishna. See, it was Krishna in drag who came to test me, and I blew it, right? There are dozens of those stories, where, somebody came along just to run you through and you blew it, You met him on Telegraph Avenue and you didn't give him a dime or something like that, And Maharaji kept repeating, and I felt worse and worse. He kept saying, no, he knows a lot and he can speak well, but he doesn't, he just doesn't know people. And I kept agreeing with him, and everybody was agreeing, and everybody was totally in agreement that I didn't know people. And then he says, can you imagine, he would have let that sadhu in from outside, and that man wasn't pure. And I went through what? Well, okay. And he looked at me and he hit me on the head. And what he was continually saying to me was, trust your heart. You're getting the cues, trust them. We have a tendency to not trust them unless they're written in a book with a leather cover or a cloth cover, or unless somebody that looks important says them. And actually, every time they say them, what happens is we say, boy, right on. And how do we know it's right on? We must know. And if you already know, what did you need to read it for? To reassure yourself that you knew. And that's the far-out aspect of, quote, the guru trip. That those of us that have followed the path of an external guru, which is for some people under certain conditions, for those people you go and you worship this man or woman and this body, and you love it, and you hang out and you cling to it, and you sing to it, and you bedeck it with flowers, and you just dream about it and think about it, and then slowly, it and you come closer and closer together until you begin to experience it. It's like making love. And at the moment of where the orgasm is approaching, where there are no longer two people, but it merges and there is merely a process going on. But there are not two separate self-consciousnesses at that moment. Until after a while, what you begin to find is that if you quiet your mind down just a bit, you begin to experience a force in you designing or directing or defining or intuitively validating your actions. And more you say, somebody says, why did you do that? You say, I can't give you a rational reason why I did it. I say, it intuitively feels right on. Or it feels in the Tao, or it feels harmonious, or it's far out, because when I was a social scientist, or I still am, but when I was being a social scientist. Intuition was a pretty dirty word. Even though Einstein had said, I didn't arrive at my understanding of the rational laws of the fundamental laws of the universe through my rational mind. He implied that it was intuition. How do you connect with that inner, you could call it guru, you could call it wisdom, you could call it the Atman, you could not call it anything. The way of approaching it is through space, through giving space. That is, when somebody does something to you, the reaction, between the stimulus and the reaction, there's just a little tiny bit of space. And that space is the perspective that allows you to see what's happening. For example, if I'm sitting with my mala, my beads, just doing ram, ram, somebody comes up to me and says, you really blew it the other night. You were terrible. I just thought I'd tell you that. Now, ego in me will go, well, there were all kinds of circumstances that demanded that I had But in me there is also this Ram. And all I see is Maharaji in drag coming up to run me through. Go ahead, I'll catch you this time. Because from according to my method, everybody I meet is the same being, just with different faces. It's all central casting. Like everybody here, well, most everybody here thinks there's somebody or other. Behind who you think you are, we are. And as long as I'm busy thinking I'm somebody, then if you do something to who you think I am, who I think I am responds, and we get into a mechanical runoff, which there's really nothing happening at all except just mechanics. Now, giving that space doesn't determine what the response will be, but the response, I might hit the guy. I don't know. But that space, that perspective, which is what the use of mantra is about in daily life, it's what's called meditation in action, in Trungpa's words. That space just makes the whole thing start to be tuned to a different plane of reality. We find ourselves in a very interesting predicament at this moment in the illusion of time. It seems apparent since 10 years ago, this kind of an audience wouldn't gather to sit around and talk about, quote, spiritual subjects, that something is afoot, without getting too astrally melodramatic about the Aquarian bloop or the, whatever it is. Something's happening, there's not much doubt about it. But what is also equally apparent is that the whole system, the game, which includes nivritti and pravritti, which includes the force that is the force of the many returning to the one, or becoming conscious of the oneness, which of course also is an illusion, is being fed great energy. But similarly, the other force, the force that's going from the one into the many, that's increasing the paranoia, the separateness, the illusion, the anger, the frustration, the neurosis, the horror of it all, that's also being fed incredible energy. And in a way, you see, the energy curve is like a geometric curve. It's like almost going straight up at this point. And we're all experiencing more and more energy, and if you just hang around satsang, you say, it's amazing. God is manifesting, taking over the world, the light is all manifesting. But if you pick up a paper, you say, oh my God, the whole thing's going under. I mean, there are facts that we must face that about ecology that are so horrible. I mean, it's getting clear now that the problem isn't going to be energy, the problem is going to be food. And that, like, within 10 years, billions of people are going to die of starvation. Even if everybody shares everything, theoretically. And it's very hard when the intensity of the game gets so high, when there's so much energy in the system, not to get caught in the good and evil polarity, because it's finding each of our prices. I mean, each man has a price, or each woman has a price. And when the thing gets too heavy, like when the police state gets too oppressive, people get caught in being angry. When your buddies go to prison, like two of my friends just went to prison for 15 and 20 years for manufacturing LSD, supposedly. And it's hard not to get into why that judge, I'd like to, I'm going to send him a hate letter. Or at a more conscious level, getting into, well, I'm going to become a candidate for, and I'm going to be involved in local politics and start to change the game. Now, that may be beautiful or it may be horrible, depending on where you're doing it from. If you're doing it out of anger or out of being caught in the polarity, you're just perpetuating the horrible melodrama. The game only gets harmonious at the point where, though we play with full involvement, we are sitting totally behind it, ever present, with no attachment. Total involvement, but no attachment. Like, one of the conclusions of the ecological predicament is local gardens and local government. And I can imagine myself being involved in the next few years in finding a way to grow a garden and to become involved in the local scene. Now, I'm doing this not because, and this is a very tricky point about what's called the Bodhisattva vow. I'm doing this not because I think good is going to prevail, or that it must prevail. Because to me, all of the forces are manifestations of the faces of God. But I'm doing it because that's what I do. That's my part in it. Now we're coming to the meaning of the term Dharma. Because to hear your Dharma means to hear what part you play in the total panoramic vision of the way in which the universe is. If those of you that have read the Bhagavad Gita, here is Arjuna, who's a really nice guy. Arjuna is a good family man. He's a good warrior. He's a really good guy, and he fights for right. And he's about to start this battle, and he's sitting with Krishna, who happens to be his charioteer and also happens to be God. And he looks at the other side of who he's going to fight, and he says, oh, he throws down his spear and he says, I'm not going to fight. He says, because for me to fight would mean that I have to go against every single thing I believe. Because I would be killing my aunts, my uncles, and my teachers, and all my friends, because the other side are full of good people too. I'm not going to fight Krishna. I don't care. I'm giving up. Because even if I win, this thing will be so drenched in blood, the whole family structure will be destroyed. Everything that ever meant anything to me will be gone. And Krishna says to him, which is the rest of the Gita, hey man, you don't have any choice. And then Krishna shows him how, in effect, it's all happened already. Because Krishna gives him the vision to see the future as well as the present. And Krishna shows him who Krishna is and manifests at one point as this huge open jaw in which the warriors are crushing in, and their heads are getting crushed against his teeth, which in Hinduism is called the Shiva aspect. And here he's saying to Arjuna, you are going to have to be an instrument of the Shiva aspect of God. That is, you're going to have to be an instrument of the destructive component of the whole thing. Because if you look at nature, you will notice in nature, things are created, they are preserved, and then they destroy. Stuff grows, it flowers, and it rots. All of us are born, we grow up, we get old, sick, and weak, and we die. Isn't that far out? I mean, if it's all so beautiful, you realize that the last quarter of almost everybody's life is in pain, in fear, in suffering, and in horror. That was Buddha's point in his Four Noble Truths. Is that godless? Is there no plan? Is it total randomness? What's the story? Now, if you can recognize all these different aspects of the dance, it's like, I'm not saying, there's an interesting thing. In the Ramayana, the story of Ram, Ram does battle with Ravana, who's the bad guy. Ravana is a lot like Nixon was at the moment of his last election, right? Landslide victory. He's the king. He's 4 more years, right? And he says, I was talking to Tricia and she said, Daddy, isn't it too bad? This will be your last campaign. And everybody shouted, no, no, no. And he was sitting there having made it. And he had, in Ravana's case, Ravana has 10 heads. And they're all ego. And Ravana says, I am the ruler of all the worlds. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. That's Ozymandias' line, but it's the same, roughly the same. And he's so scary that everybody's afraid of him. And he gets so pompous that he decides to rip off Ram's wife, God's wife. He's going to get the Shakti of the universe. So he steals Sita, the wife, and he takes her to his island and he says, okay, I want you to make it with me. This is God's wife now. And she says, over my dead body. She says, you're nothing but a firefly compared to the sun. What are you kidding me? She says, cut off my head with your knife. That's the closest you're going to get to me. Because once you've made it with God, all the rest is kind of irrelevant. That's what a lot of us are finding. You see, that's our predicament. We try to make it real, but it doesn't quite come on. Now, the interesting aside about Ravana is that Ravana was actually a very high yogi in his previous birth. But he had a little heavy work to finish off. So he became Ravana. But he was due to be fully enlightened in this birth, which was going to happen by being killed by God. Because if you get killed by God, you get fully enlightened. Right? Hear that? In other words, they said to him, okay, Ravana, we got this heavy part. You've got to play Iago. See? And, geez, I played that last week. You've got to play it again. See, but it's okay, because if you do that, you're going to get a raise. So now, who's Nixon? An interesting question, see? I mean, which angle do you look from? See? At one level, it's a tremendously poignant predicament. It is what is known as heavy karma. Very, very, just about the heavy, I mean, Vietnam was about the heaviest karma that a man could have. Now, whether or not you are perpetuating the same karma is determined by how you react to a being like Nixon. Because Nixon, Richard Milhous Nixon, is a package. And in that package is another being just like you and just like me. As far out? It's sitting back in there, and it's screaming, here I am, but nobody's listening, including the package. I did a television show about a year ago in New York with Ultraviolet, who used to be with Andy Warhol. And Ultra and I guess you call her Ultra, we're talking about this issue, and we decided we really had to. I said the only way you could free Nixon to become compassionate was to look behind the mask to the being back there and make contact with that being without demanding he be other than he is, because he's really just playing his part in the drama. And then he's free to change. But the minute you treat somebody in terms of their role, you lock them into their role and they can't change. So the game is to look behind it. So we were trying to look into the television camera and look behind the Richard Nixon that we both were very upset about, and look back and say, we love you, Richard. And I said, Ultra, I don't hear the feeling in your voice. Let's try it again. Now, I don't want Nixon's part. I don't even want my part. I mean, all parts are just parts. But what the Dharma means is that you hear quietly, as you quiet down, you begin to hear what your part is in the whole operation. And you begin to play it not out of self-conscious, I think I'll do this now, but just because it feels Taoist, it feels harmonious, it feels in the flow. So that one woman will say, I'm not going to have children, and when she says it, it feels just like the Earth Mother speaking, and another one says, I'm not going to have children, and you just hear hysteria. Somebody else says, my work is to have children, and you feel right on, and somebody else says, my work is to have children, and it feels weird. Because there is no form, there is no single form, there's no holy trip. You can't be like Buddha or be like Christ. That isn't the game. The game is to be what you need to be, which is follow your natural course, but do it with the space, the inner space that's quiet enough to hear what your natural course is, not head trip your way into it. Because every time you head trip your way into it, you keep alienating yourself from it. Don Juan says, it is the art of a warrior to balance the terror of being a man with the wonder of being a man and a woman, that as you provide space inside, which comes through meditation, it comes through mantra, it comes through devotion, it comes through whatever your, quote, yogic technique is, once there's that little space, you begin to be awed at the total exquisiteness of the design of it all. And you begin to see what would be called the awful compassion of it. When you get behind your own romanticizing of your life and everybody else's life, you merely see the unfolding of the laws of the universe, and you see layer upon layer, each more awesome than the last, until when you're back here, every pebble and every form on this plane becomes some kind of pure spirit being manifested, and it's just awful. It's full of awe. And the terror of it is you also look at the total impersonality of it. And that it may well be that we are in the Kali Yuga, and that we are just before the pralaya, and at some moment the whole thing is going to go up. And this is all going to be over just like that. And when it's all over, here we'll all still be. Isn't that fun? And we'll say, wasn't that one far out? Boy, that's got the Exorcist beat. That really took me on a trip. I really thought it was real. But knowing that cute up level there's no way you can drop out of this round. You can't drop out. That's the far out thing. Try it. What are you going to do? Well, won't do anything. Well, that's an interesting thing to do. Then what are you going to do? Because there isn't any way to drop out. All you can do is be quiet enough to hear on every plane what your part is, and play it with compassion and with love and with openness and with humanity. Now, I'm dealing with people these days like Trungpa Rinpoche, who comes drunk to his lectures, screws all his devotees. He's a wild man. He's a great Lama. You know, either he's a total Meshuggah, or he's an exquisite statement of Dorje Trollo, of one of the faces of Padmasambhava, which is the angry deity who is the compassion to cut through all of our stuff. Because what other holy man do you know that comes drunk to his lectures and screws all his women's devotees? Well, most of them, no. See, your question, is he pure? Far out. Could it be? Could it be? Or is that, no, it doesn't fit into my rule book of gurus. There's nothing even under subcategory C that allows for that. He must be, it must be the work of the devil. Now, what's happened in the training that I've been subjected to, which has involved coming into contact with a number of people who have great powers and who reflect very different aspects of the dance than the aspect that is whatever my Dharma is. Those of you that are familiar with Alice Bailey and the Theosophists are familiar with the concept of rays. Or we could talk about archetypes. Like on this plane, or if you like astral signs, how about those, 12 astral signs? Like on this plane, there are all of us, and every single one of us has a different thumbprint, has some unique individuality. But we can say, people come up to me and say, I bet you're an Aries. And I say, yes. And they say, I knew it. I knew it. It's like the old psychology days when somebody says, I bet you're a high PD, low HY on the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory. And on the astral planes, each of us have our identities also. And what the transformations that occur in most of us are that we start to divest our attached emotional, romantic involvement in this particular package. Now, at first, we might buy into a Buddhist thing at the wrong level and say, it's all void, it's nothing. Which is just another place, by the way. It's not that either. And in order to extricate ourselves from the somethingness, we try to attach ourselves to nothingness, which then becomes something. But as we extract ourselves from so much identity with being Sam, Frida, Joan, or Mary, we begin to recognize that we are being transformed, if you will, into our archetypal selves. If you look at the pyramid, the one on the top, then it goes into the two, the yin and the yang, and then it starts to go into the 3, 5, 7, 9, 12, look, till it gets to us. And every one of us is one of those rays going all the way back to the yin-yang and back to the one. Now, my training from my guru is sub-ek, meaning it's all one. Sub-ek, there's only one. Meaning keep your eye on the top of the pyramid. Don't get caught in the astral melodrama. Okay? And by keeping your eye on the top of the mark, of the point up there, the peak, and cleaning away all the stuff by purification, by calming, by centering, by being honest with yourself when you're done with stuff, by running through your trips consciously, all this stuff, as you sort of lighten and let go, you're aiming towards the one, and you're slowly merging into this one. But in the course of it, you're going to not go through all of these different paths, you're going to go through one of these paths. And these paths aren't just practices, they are actually identities. And so you're going to find you are on the Christ trip, or you are on the Shiva trip. And those are very different aspects. They're different rays. And the interesting training that I've been finding myself subjected to is coming in contact with very, very evolved beings who represent different rays than the one I do. And finding the seductiveness of that ray, and then going in under it, and then feeling, no, it's not right in my heart, and then feeling I've got to pull back and find my own way. Now, that's what I would call taking teachings instead of getting hung up about a teacher. That is, each of us has work to do, like, to the extent that you're afraid of chaos, to the extent that you're afraid of death, to the extent that you're afraid of pain and suffering, you've got work to do. One of the things I do, for example, is I sit with people that are dying. And that really, they teach me a hell of a lot. Or I'm with somebody who, when somebody dies, they say, well, that was interesting. Like Maharaji laughing. My guru laughed at death? Somebody he loved him? Like I was getting all involved in setting up these centers for dying. That is, trying to create spaces where people could consciously come to die. And recently I was in retreat for 7 weeks out in the desert. I went out in my VW bus and I camped out in the desert myself, and I just because doing this and interacting when you're just somebody else on the path, you pick up a lot of stuff along the way. And then you got to quiet down to reconnect. For me, I do anyway. And so I needed to go off in the desert for a while. And when I got quieter, I heard, cool it, don't rush so fast into that, you're not ready. You're not ready because you're still got stuff to do about dying yourself. And if I've still got stuff to do about dying and I go create huge superstructures to help people die, all I'm doing is creating superstructures of illusion. Because no matter how subtle it is, all I'm transmitting is my own fear. Because the funny thing is, you transmit to other people not all the nice words you say, but your own being, whatever that is. And you could be a bus driver and just handing the change and you're transmitting the Buddha nature. I mean, I went into a restaurant and I was served by somebody who was so beautiful that I just felt like I had been in the presence of a saintly being. I just got suddenly energy poured into me from this being, and all the being was doing was pouring me a cup of coffee. And all I said was thank you, and here's 15 cents, and thank you, and I went and sat down. There was no more, there wasn't, you're Buddha. I know who you are, don't kid me. So that listening is to listen to hear what part you're playing. And I have met so many beings, like my relations with Tim Leary were an example of somebody who I worked with for many years who represented a different ray than I do. If you read Terror 2, his new book, you will see that he speaks about different stuff than I do. That doesn't mean one of us is a bad guy. It merely means we represent different aspects of the dance. And then you have to listen into your heart about what your work is with somebody who is in a different aspect. Sometimes you have work to do because you're freaked by that aspect. And if you're busy being attached by wanting it or wanting to get rid of it, you got work to do. And sometimes you can look at a different aspect and say, I honor you. I love you, you do your work, I do my work, and it's okay. There's no attachment, there's no clinging. To look at the universe and see all of the forces, the heavy ones, the light ones, the destructive ones, the creative ones, to find what your part is in it, and if your part is that of the Bodhisattva, that of reducing the suffering of all human beings, and that's all your work is. You just do it and do it and do it until there is no you in there. There is merely this instrument for the relieving of suffering of all beings, and that is one of the parts of the dance, of which another and equally important of the dance is that which creates all the suffering in the universe. That's what's so far out about it. See, there's a very complex, like the other day I went hang flying, what's it called, hang sailing? With Stuart Brand. He took me out, and I'm still all black and blue from my attempt to become a bird. But it was something. What it was, I don't know. Now, when Stuart and I spend time together, we're very fond of one another. And I really just went out to be with Stuart for the day, because I really dig Stuart. Stuart is really what would be called a utopianist. And I am what you might call a mystic. Stuart, as represented in the Whole Earth catalog, and now his new venture, called the Coevolution Quarterly, is working full-time to make it beautiful now for everybody. That's the game. And I said to him, well, Stuart, do you care that it be beautiful for everyone now? And he said, yes. And I said, well, there's the problem. Not that you do it. I mean, I dig being a utopianist, but without attachment. See, the predicament of having the inner strength and the inner courage, and this is the thing Don Juan's talking about, the ability to see the horror of it, the terror of it, to see the forces equal and opposite always, and realize, as Buddha pointed out, that as long as this plane exists, which has on it people who desire anything, there will be suffering. And at the same time, to work full-time for a utopian existence, for a place where there is no suffering. See, there's the place where it comes together, where you work full-time to end suffering, knowing damn well the suffering's going to continue, without getting disillusioned, because you've already been through that. Because, as the Gita says, you are not attached to your goals. You are merely doing it as an offering to God, because that's your part in the dance of making God manifest on earth. And that's what it's about. I just spent 3 days with Wavy Gravy, who's a very dear friend. And Wavy said to me, I was having Wavy read the third Chinese patriarch, which tells you not to be attached, and not to be attached to not being attached, and so on. And Wavy says, well, can I care? Can I choose to choose? Can I choose to care? But not the way you're saying it, Wavy. Like when you meet another person who has given space to it all, you meet them and they might be in the middle, you might be at the moment, like in the middle of sandbagging a dike to keep the waves from crashing in at a moment of incredible crisis. And you look into their eyes and they are totally right here, empty, compassionate, loving, full, nothing. Oh, you here? I'm here. Far out. You don't even stop in midstream. The sandbags are going, but the eyes meet and it's nothing. And that's the quality of my relation with Trungpa Rinpoche. He's doing this dance that, my God, he's practically eating burning swords. But when I look in his eyes, there's, you here, I'm here, far out. And then whoosh, whoosh. I mean, he freaks me completely at that level. And there I am being freaked, and he's freaking me, and we look at each other, and I, far out. You here? I'm here. Far out. I'm freaked, right. I'm freaking, right. And here we are. Most of us have gone through realizing that we were connected to a dance that was much more than we had been led to believe that life was about, which made us grab at and cling to a lot of models that were available, many of which came from the East. And then very slowly we have been developing our own models, or buying from the East that which is usable and rejecting that which isn't, or getting to the point where we realized that we had to just get our scene together. And so many of us are just getting our scenes together. And we got holy too fast. We got into Zumbek soup. And then we have to go back, and we go back, and suddenly you look at somebody who was all in white, being a vegetarian wisp of light, and you find them in a bar with you drinking and eating a steak. And they look at you, and there's a slight defiant look and a slight, it's like... See, the first time I decided that I had been a little phony holy, see, I noticed that I still was craving foods that I wasn't supposed to eat. So I remember the first time I decided, look, what am I, afraid of the devil? Like, what I've done is I've been vegetarian for 6 years, and I'm busy with, like, marks on my sleeve. I'm a 6-year vegetarian. How long have you been a vegetarian? So I decided, well, the hell with this. I've just got to break my own record so I can get on with it, you know. So I went into a Chinese restaurant, and I picked a very out-of-the-way one with a dark lights, you know. And I went and I decided I'll really go whole hog because I'm a Jew and a Hindu. I'll order spare ribs because that really does it at all levels. And if God's going to strike me dead, he'll do it right in this Chinese restaurant and the whole thing will be over. So I sit down and I start to eat my spare ribs, which I'm enjoying thoroughly. I've offered them to Maharaji, by the way. I say, Maharaji, I know you'll find this strange. And then I crack up completely. Since he is the spare ribs and me eating them too, so there's many levels of humor in that one. And you're only eating yourself, and the whole thing is bizarre. There's the guy at the next booth, and he's in a suit and a tie, and he's just finishing his lunch, and he's facing me in the next booth. And I bless the food, you know, I'm holding the plate of spare ribs and offering them to God. And he watches this whole thing, and then I eat, and then afterwards he says, excuse me, could I come over and talk to you? And I finished my spare ribs. I said, sir. He comes over and sits down. He says, I'm a salesman for an electronics equipment company from MIT, and he said, I couldn't help noticing the way you offered the food. He said, the spirit was so powerful, it affected me tremendously. And he said, I just wanted to come over to share with you a moment of the spirit and to thank you for doing that. So it turned out that he was a fundamentalist Christian, and we had a long talk about Christ and the Bible, and he was telling me about how at times he's kind of hypocritical. He'll be in a bar, and there'll be a beautiful girl, and he'll talk to her, and she'll be upset, and he'll say, well, let me talk to you about the Bible, and really he wants to make it with her, and we were going through all that stuff, which everybody goes through, I'm sure. I mean, we all deal with that stuff. See, it's all got to be out front. I mean, there's no... Who are you gonna hide from? You know, you're all the guru. What the hell? So finally, he says, well, we would talk for about an hour, and he says, this has been a thrilling conversation. He says, I just feel so honored having met you. Could you tell me one thing? Could you tell me what you eat? What's your diet? And I look down, and there's a big pile of bones. You see, it's very complicated about diet because there are stages, like if you're trying to do, say, Kundalini Yoga, you've got to watch every morsel that goes into your mouth, because if you try to do pranayama and you don't be very careful about your diet, you're really going to blow your scene of your body, of this incarnation. So that when you're doing certain kinds of yoga, certain kinds of sadhana, certain diets are required. Also, at certain places, you get, like through meditation, you get to a very delicate space where everything you put into your body, you'll really recognize that statement, you are what you eat, and you'll notice the vibration of animals that have died violently in your body. Then there are other times when your stage is different. I mean, like, it is very clear, like, Tibetans have always eaten meat, and they're certainly as high as anybody else I know. Now you say, well, they had to eat meat because they were up in the mountains, but meat is meat. Now, all I'm saying is the diet, just like everything else, you've got to listen in your heart to hear what you particularly need as your sadhana. What we tended to do was get very fanatic about the diet and let all the rest go to hell. We got much more purist about our diets than we did about the rest of the game. And we've got to bring it all together. You can't have lustful sex and be a macrobiotic and think you're making it. See? The sex has to be as conscious as the rice you put in the pot. You put rice in the pot with mantra, and then a girl walks in the room and you know. And somehow that's off limits because it's not my diet, you know. Now, the predicament is that all of us are in transformation at this point. That's what you're doing here, I assume, unless you come here to bless us. Or unless you came in by mistake and you're sitting in the middle and you can't get out. Okay? Those are the three alternatives of what you're doing here, all right? And if you are in the process, along with the rest of us, and you are not, by definition, sitting in a cave in the Himalayas at this moment, you, like I, am dealing with the stuff of daily life in the marketplace. And the fire burns hot. Yeah, right. Right. And that's great, because the hotter the fire, the faster the purification. And the only fear you have is you're going to go under. But the fact is you can't go under. That's the one that's so far out. You can think you went under. You can really scare yourself. Oh, I went under. Okay? But in fact, if you give yourself that little space again, you come right back up again. And you'll see that the fire is only really hot when you risk going under. You can protect your game. You can protect, it's like protect a small investment. Like I can sit up in a cave in the mountains, and like I was sitting out in the desert, and I got so holy. I mean, the cactus were all luminous. And I was seeing visions clearly, and I saw how it all was, and I was totally non-attached, and I was full of love and compassion. It was all beautiful. And I saw a wolf, and I loved it, and the wolf loved me, and it was incredibly spacey. And boy, that's who I am. And then I started to drive from Arizona, and I did it slowly. I went to Joshua Tree for a couple of weeks slowly. Then I ended up coming through Los Angeles. But I didn't stop because that might have been a little heavy, so I kept right on going. And I came right up and I settled in the Bay Area, where it's all satsang, isn't it? And I think, oh, I can eat fire. I can handle all this. And yesterday, Krishna Das said to me, I think you ought to go off by yourself for a day. I said, you think I'm paranoid? He says, yeah, totally. So I did. I've just been in the Samuel Taylor State Park overnight. Just came here from the park. I went to cool myself out so I could be here. Because yesterday I was, God says you should do it this way. Roughly, that's the way I was coming on. Now, even when you're in the middle of that hell, Loka, you know, here we are, like I could say to Krishna Das, do you think I'm paranoid? And he could say, yes, and who's that talking to who? That's not paranoia. That's the other place. So it's okay. I mean, I'm not afraid I'm going under it all. The faith, see, that's the issue. The whole thing is Shraddha, of faith. And at first, your faith is very flickery, so you keep needing your connection. You got to rush to the guru, or you got to have satsang, or you got to have a pure this, or a little picture, or run to your puja table, or do your arti every night, or whatever the trip is, or wear your medallion, or whatever the is. Up until then, you felt you're a schnook that's hanging on to this high thing by dear life, and you've gotten into the door by cheating somehow, and you're holding on, see? Isn't that true? I mean, am I talking the way you... And then this other space, you start to think, because all these books have been saying it. They keep saying, you are it. They say, and you look like they're talking to somebody behind you, you know? I'll tell him when he comes in, or sorry to say that to him, but not to me. I know what a no-good Nick I am, you know? And then you begin to recognize, especially, or if you had the opportunity to be around a being who is a pure mirror, that is a non-judgmental person, who you look at in the eyes and you can see that they see all your crap and they are all right here, and yeah, and here we are. It's that story which I've told before of the night when I was at the temple in Kenshi, and I thought about wanting to give money to a lama, and I just thought about it, and then I got into my sleeping bag. It was very cold, and I started to have all these sexual fantasies. And I had these fantasies of how I'd use my yogic powers for sexual conquest. And the fantasies were so intense that I ended up having an orgasm. And the next morning I was called to my guru, who was 12 miles away. And I came up to him and he looked at me and he says, "You want to give money to a lama?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "Very good." And he hit me on the head and he told everybody, and I was basking in all this. And then suddenly I thought, holy mackerel. If he knows that, he knows that, and I couldn't look at him, and when I finally looked at him, he was just looking at me with total love and compassion. Like, sure, and here we are. Okay? Because a dispassionate person can look at all the stuff of the universe and say yes, and there's none of your stuff, no matter what your stuff is, that is more than that. It's just more stuff. It's my stuff. I mean, you may think it's all stuff, but I haven't told you my stuff yet. The next little flip that occurs once the faith starts to get stronger, so you're willing to fit in the marketplace and roast, realizing that all that will burn away is what's burnable, and that who you are is not burnable, right? So that you're not vulnerable, and that's what Christ's message was. He says, go ahead, what are you going to do? Spit on me, laugh at me, jeer at me? What do you want to do? Nail me up? Go ahead. That isn't who I am. Go ahead. It'll make you happy? Go ahead. Here. Father, forgive them. They don't know what the hell they're doing. Because Christ was reminding us. That's what he did. He reminded us that we aren't that which suffers. And that's the profound flip that occurs when you recognize that suffering is grace. And that's a big one. When you realize that the only reason you're suffering is because you're holding. You got a secret stash of attachment somewhere, or you wouldn't be suffering. No attachment, no suffering. You're only suffering because you think it ought to be other than the way it is. Now, it's all nice and easy to talk about that when the suffering's a little one. But like in dealing with Wavy has a spinal problem that keeps him in excruciating pain almost all the time. And that's tough sadhana to convert that pain. Physical pain, see, that's the one most people are afraid of. And that's where the dying fear is, the fear of pain. And I had this experience with this woman that was dying in Los Angeles, where I sat next to her. She was in the final stages of dying, really, from cancer of the nervous system. And it was all through her groin, all through her thighs and her stomach, and she was rubbing her legs with a look of excruciating pain on her face, as if she were experiencing that. And I just sat in front of her, and at first, because I've loved her and I've known her, I was going through all my emotional reactions to her pain. And then I quieted down and I did Buddhist cemetery meditation. That is, watching the decaying body and watching the pain and watching it all, and sitting right with it and being quiet inside. And I got quieter and quieter because I was working, this is the tantric thing, I was working with the intense energy of that pain and my pity and converting that energy. So there was a tremendous amount in it. So as I got into this deep space, it got very, very deep and very quiet. And she all the time is writhing in pain, and she turns to me and she says, "I'm feeling so peaceful." She said, "I don't know what you're doing, but I just feel in total peace." And all the time, the body is writhing in pain, and the personality is struggling, and behind it we are. And there's no pain, and there's no suffering. And at that moment, she and I were the happiest beings in Los Angeles, I think. We were totally blissed out at that moment. The whole room was luminous, and we were just sitting together in this place of total peace, and all the time she was struggling with this body, but that wasn't who she was being. That was merely happening. In the same way your heart beats, but you're not beating your heart. So the process is taking the stuff of daily life and giving space to just how it is, and taking that energy and converting it and working with it, working with your desires, working with your fear, working with your loneliness. When you're lonely, instead of trying not to be lonely, be lonely. If you're depressed, far out, I'm depressed. Hell, isn't it? And here we are depressed. Wow. You know, I spent years trying to not be how I was. And in order to come to see you, I would have to take a lot of things in the men's room to get ready to be beautiful. Because, as Trungpa would say, I was working out of a philosophy of poverty rather than of riches. The philosophy of riches says, I am what I am, and here it is, and here we all are, being just what we are, and it's enough. And when we'll be something else, we'll be something else, and that'll be fine too. Meaning giving space to your being as it is. Now, don't let what I'm saying imply that I'm against any kind of systems, methods, ashrams, gurus, yogas of any kind. These are all exquisite training fields, and I personally avail myself of many of them. I sit zazen in sesshin. In a couple of weeks, I'm going to be sitting in Southern Buddhist meditation for 10 or 12 days with many beings. I've been studied with many, many different yogic techniques. And I can understand the value of the Sufi dance and the Zen sitting and on and on and on. And they each have an exquisite function. And you've got to listen in your heart to find out whether that's right on for you. The proselytizing is impure when you come on that it's good for someone else. All you can say to someone else is listen to your heart. You'll know what's good for you.